With each frantic step, Princess Zuri plunged deeper into the uncharted regions of the Marula Kingdom's vast savanna forest. Her shawl snagged on thorny branches, and clusters of tall grass whipped against her arms and legs, leaving tiny scratches. Yet she hardly felt the stinging pain. Her heart pounded relentlessly, still echoing the shock of Sanusi's confession. Queen Kamali wanted her gone, never to return. Every so often, Zuri glanced over her shoulder, expecting a band of palace guards to burst through the undergrowth. But the only sounds were the gentle hum of cicadas and the wind sighing through the twisted trunks of ancient baobabs. Above, the canopy of wide leaves broke the sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor, and towering trees stretched as far as her eyes could see. Though she was truly alone for the first time in her life, Zuri felt a curious mix of fear and resolve. She knew she had no choice but to keep going. The day wore on, and the sun's heat became oppressive. With no water to quench her thirst, Zuri paused near a slender stream slicing through a cluster of tall reeds. She knelt, cupping her hands to scoop cool, clear water to her lips. Her reflection shimmered in the ripples, a young girl with exhausted eyes, smudges of dirt on her cheeks, and hair disheveled from hours of running. The thirst sated, she rose unsteadily, determined to find shelter before nightfall. As dusk approached, the forest shadows grew long and menacing. Strange calls echoed from somewhere in the thick brush, howls, hoots, and the occasional rustling of unseen creatures. Zuri's heart lurched with every sudden noise, but she pressed on, pushing past creeping vines and gnarled tree roots. She understood that if she stopped moving, fear might paralyze her. At last, when her legs could carry her no farther, she stumbled into a small clearing. Soft moonlight spilled into the open space, illuminating a modest structure woven from thick reeds and mud bricks, a hut of sorts, dwarfed by an enormous baobab that seemed to guard it. An old wooden door creaked on a hinge that had clearly weathered the elements. It was the first sign of human habitation Zuri had seen in many hours. Timidly, she approached. She tapped once on the door. Silence. She tapped again, then pressed her ear against the rough surface. No answer. Summoning what remained of her courage, she gave the door a gentle push. It swung open to reveal a single, dimly lit room. A few clay pots lined one wall, a small fire pit occupied the center, and a row of hand-woven sleeping mats were laid neatly along the opposite side. Zuri hesitated, it seemed wrong to intrude. Yet exhaustion and desperation overpowered her manners. Stepping inside, she latched the door behind her. She located a gourd of water near the fire pit and drank sparingly, fearful of consuming too much of a stranger's provisions. Then she settled on one of the mats, tucking her legs beneath her and wishing she had a warm blanket. Minutes stretched into an hour. Despite her racing thoughts, fatigue eventually conquered all. She dozed off, lulled by the soft crackle of coals in the fire pit and the croaking chorus of frogs in the distance. Zuri stirred to the rumble of low voices outside the hut. Feet shuffled against the ground, and someone whispered, who left the door latched. A jolt of fear tore through her. She sat up, blinking in the dim interior. Silhouettes moved against the thin reed walls. There were several of them, more than 2 or 3, from the sound of it. The door pushed inward, revealing a line of diminutive figures, each carrying a torch or lantern that cast dancing shadows. There were men and women of modest stature, each wearing practical clothing suited to forest living, simple wraps of patterned cloth, short spears or carved walking sticks slung over their shoulders. Their faces, now lit by flickering firelight, showed expressions of alarm, and no small measure of caution, at discovering a stranger in their home. "Who are you?" asked one, a man with a broad forehead and a wary squint. His voice resonated with quiet authority. Startled, Zuri scrambled to her feet. Her eyes darted to the door, measuring the distance in case she needed to flee. But exhaustion still weighed on her muscles. Bowing her head respectfully, she answered, her voice trembling, "My name is Zuri. I was lost in the forest and needed a place to stay. I am so sorry for trespassing." Behind the man, the others exchanged uncertain glances. An older woman with tightly braided hair stepped forward. "You're lucky we came home when we did. This forest can be dangerous at night, child. Tell us, how did you find yourself out here, alone?" A torrent of emotions rose in Zuri's throat. She struggled to piece together a coherent explanation. Should she reveal her identity as the princess? What if word reached Queen Kamali that she was still alive? Yet these people had shown her no harm, perhaps honesty was the best path. "My father is the king," she began shakily. "I had to flee the palace because the new queen wishes me dead." Silence fell in the hut. "A palace tracker spared my life," Zuri continued. "I had no choice but to run, or she would have me killed. Please, I don't mean to involve you in my troubles. She choked back tears. "I need somewhere safe, at least for a while." Her words hung in the silence, thick with tension and disbelief. This cluster of strangers glanced at one another, eyes flickering in the torchlight. To claim to be the princess was no small statement. They all understood the potential danger that came with harboring royalty marked for death. Yet they also saw the genuine terror and fatigue in Zuri's face. The broad forehead man exhaled slowly, as though weighing the consequences. Then the older woman stepped closer and laid a gentle hand on Zuri's shoulder. "We are the 7 guardians of these woods, forest dwellers and keepers of its sacred sites," she said in a soothing tone. "If what you say is true, it is our duty, and our calling, to protect the innocent. You may remain with us, for now." Zuri's knees nearly gave out with relief. She bowed her head again, her voice a rasping whisper. Thank you so much." The group guided her to a stool near the fire pit. Another guardian, a soft-spoken man with kind eyes, offered her a bowl of stew. Starving, she sipped eagerly, feeling warmth spread through her limbs. Yet even as her fear ebbed, the gravity of her new circumstances loomed over her. She was a runaway princess, living under the constant shadow of Kamali's hatred. For that night, at least, Zuri was safe. The guardians placed fresh mats around the fire pit, giving her a sense of belonging and comfort. Outside, the moonlit forest hummed with nocturnal life. And somewhere beyond those towering baobabs, the Marula Kingdom continued on, unaware that the rightful heir slept under a humble roof among 7 forest dwellers, her fate now bound up with theirs in ways none could yet foresee. Morning broke over the forest like molten gold. Rays of sunlight filtered through the thick canopy of leaves, casting dappled patterns on the ground where Princess Zuri awoke among her 7 new companions, the forest guardians. She blinked groggily, momentarily disoriented by her surroundings, the woven reed walls of the hut, the low embers in the small central fire pit, and the faint aroma of herbs drifting from clay pots arranged along one side. A gentle voice reached her ears. "You must be hungry, child. Come, eat." It belonged to the older woman who had welcomed her the night before. She beckoned Zuri toward a simple wooden table just outside the hut. Arrayed there were bowls of warm millet porridge, roasted groundnuts, and slices of fresh mango. Zuri's stomach rumbled at the sight. "Thank you," Zuri said, bowing her head respectfully. Despite the terror of the previous day, she felt an unexpected sense of calm in this tranquil forest clearing. The guardians, though cautious, seemed ready to help her. Her mind churned with questions. Who were they, truly? How did they survive in this remote wilderness? And most of all, how long could she hide here from Queen Kamali's wrath? As she ate, the 7 forest dwellers introduced themselves more fully. There was Kwame, the broad-forehead man who held a carved walking stick that signaled his role as a leader among them. The older woman was Mama Kolila, known for her knowledge of healing herbs and the forest secrets. Beside her stood Amare and Kioni, siblings who specialized in tracking game and gathering fruits from the highest branches. Then came Jahi, a solemn man with keen eyes for spotting danger, and Rahima, who said little but carried a small drum that she used to communicate through rhythms across the forest. Last of all was Faraji, a younger guardian who beamed an almost childlike excitement whenever Zuri spoke of the palace or the world beyond the forest. While they explained their roles, Zuri found her gaze drifting toward Mama Kolila's worn hands. The older woman gently massaged dried leaves between her fingers, releasing a mild fragrance. She reminded Zuri of the court herbalist back at the palace, who used to care for the late Queen Nambala with devotion. A pang of sorrow swept through the young princess at the memory of her mother. But she shook it off, determined to focus on the present. "All of you, thank you for taking me in," Zuri said once she'd finished her meal. "I promise I'll learn to help however I can. I don't want to be a burden." Kwame gave her a thoughtful look. "We live by the forest's grace," he explained. "Each one here has tasks that benefit the whole group. If you stay, you must do your part. Though you carry a royal name, you're a child of the land first, just like us." Those words sank into Zuri's heart. Never before had she been spoken to so plainly about work and responsibility. At the palace, everything had been brought to her, served to her. She realized she must adapt, or she would never survive here. "I understand," she said solemnly. "Show me what needs doing, and I'll do my best." Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, in the grand chambers of the Marula Kingdom's palace, Queen Kamali's frustration seethed. She paced back and forth across the polished floor, her golden bangles clinking with every agitated step. Before her stood Sanusi, looking paler than usual, having just returned with a beaded wristband in his satchel. "This belonged to the princess," he claimed, voice subdued, as he extended it to Kamali. "I found it, after I carried out your orders." Kamali's dark eyes narrowed. She snatched the wristband, examining it with practiced scrutiny. On the surface, it looked identical to the beaded design Zuri had worn, and indeed, it matched the color scheme the king had commissioned for his daughter, ochre, ivory, and a thin line of turquoise in the pattern. Satisfied, she turned the band over in her palm. Yet an odd twinge of doubt tugged at her mind. She sniffed, then lifted her gaze to lock eyes with Sanusi. "You are certain?" Her tone was ice. "There is no chance she escaped?" Sanusi bowed low, feigning confidence he did not feel. "None, Your Majesty. The wild creatures will handle whatever is left." "Very well," Kamali pronounced, though her jaw remained tense. "You have done your duty. Leave." The moment Sanusi departed, Kamali hurried to the secret storeroom in the palace's eastern wing. She could not shake the uneasy feeling that clung to her like a stubborn shadow. There, hidden from prying eyes, rested the ebony mirror, its ornate blackwood frame etched with serpents and star symbols. She lit several candles and myrrh incense, letting the smoke curl around her in a pungent, spiraling dance. Carefully, she uncovered the mirror, inhaling to steady her breath. At first, its surface reflected only her own face, drawn tight with anticipation. Then, as she whispered the familiar incantation, the ripples began to stir. "Ebony mirror," she intoned, "speak to me. I ask again, who is the fairest in all the land?" For a brief moment, the mirror stayed dark, as though reluctant to answer. Then a faint glow emanated from its depths, and the soft voice returned. "Lady Kamali, your beauty is famed far and wide, yet you still ask in vain. For the radiance of Princess Zuri shines on, hidden from your gaze. Indeed, she lives, and her spirit grows stronger every day." Kamali gasped in fury, her eyes blazing. No. She clutched the mirror's edges so forcefully that her knuckles turned white. Sanusi's ruse had been exposed. The princess lived. With a furious hiss, Kamali wrapped the ebony mirror in its cloth, extinguishing its glow. She flung the storeroom door open so violently that it banged against the wall, sending echoes through the empty corridor. "This changes nothing," she snarled under her breath. "I will find her. And once I do, there will be no mercy." Back in the hidden forest clearing, days passed as Zuri tried to adapt to her new life among the 7 guardians. Each morning, she rose with the sun to gather roots and berries alongside Kioni and Amore, absorbing their knowledge of edible plants versus poisonous ones. She learned how to filter water from the stream using a hollowed gourd and heated stones, then carried it back to the communal hut. In the afternoons, Mama Kolila taught her to blend simple poultices from crushed herbs to treat scrapes and insect bites. Even chores were educational, sweeping leaves away from the hut's entrance protected against snakes that sometimes slithered through the underbrush. Jori instructed her in the basics of forest survival, pointing out signs of hidden danger, fresh paw prints from leopards, hornbill calls signaling changes in weather, and termite mounds that signaled shifting soil. Gradually, Zuri found that each day's tasks felt less like a burden and more like a path towards self-reliance. Yet at night, when she lay on the woven sleeping mat, thoughts of home flooded her mind. She remembered her father's gentle smile, the palace's vibrant courtyards, and the way people would greet her with respect. Most of all, she yearned for his comforting presence, the father who had always made her feel safe. Somewhere in the recesses of her heart, she clung to the hope that King Ekundayo would discover the truth and save her from this exile. The guardians sensed Zuri's quiet sadness but respected her silence. They offered companionship and guidance without prying into her royal memories. In return, she began to see them as a second family, kind, industrious souls bound by their duty to protect the forest's balance. Over shared meals around the fire, they told stories of ancient spirits and hidden grottos with healing springs. Zuri found solace in these legends, imagining that somewhere within these sacred woods, perhaps her mother's spirit watched over her. Unbeknownst to all in that peaceful clearing, Queen Kamali was already hatching a new plan, one that involved dark sorcery and the cunning art of disguise. The ebony mirror had spoken, Zuri yet lived, her beauty and compassion blossoming beyond Kamali's reach. The queen's envy, stoked anew, would soon unleash dangerous forces. But for now, under the watchful eyes of the towering baobabs and the guardian's guiding wisdom, Zuri slept a hopeful sleep, unaware that a storm of malice gathered at the gates of the Marula Kingdom, poised to strike once more. Nights passed in the deep forest, a tranquil hush broken only by nocturnal creatures and the soft crackle of the guardians' campfires. Princess Zuri gradually settled into this new life, practicing all that Kwame, Mama Kolila, and the others taught her. By day, she helped gather wild yams and tubers, learning to scrape the soil gently so the forest's delicate balance would remain undisturbed. By dusk, she joined them around the fire, listening raptly to tales of ancient ancestors who once roamed these very lands. Each story was rich with wisdom, and her respect for nature, and her newfound companions, grew in kind. Yet beyond the forest's boundary, trouble brewed. Queen Kamali had discovered that her steps into deception were far from finished. The ebony mirror's declaration that Zuri still lived ate at her soul like a slow poison. Night after night, Kamali secluded herself in her hidden chamber, chanting incantations, plotting ways to pinpoint Zuri's location. The Marula Kingdom's court, oblivious to Kamali's dark intentions, assumed the young princess was dead. King Ekundayo grieved openly, his pain deepening the lines on his once cheerful face. Still, Kamali could not simply abduct an entire search party and comb the forest without raising suspicion. She required stealth, something more insidious than mere swords and men. She remembered fragments of lore passed down in her native land of Katembo, tales of powerful illusions and shape-shifting illusions that could trick even the keenest eye. Over the course of weeks, Kamali gathered ingredients to brew a potent concoction: dried cobra venom from the desert, crushed petals of a rare night-blooming flower, and resin from a tree believed to harbor vengeful spirits. When the mixture was ready, she tested it by dipping a small iron dagger into the brew. Even the slightest pinprick on a rat's paw brought near instant paralysis. But it was not enough to simply coat a weapon. Zuri's guardians would never allow a threatening stranger to enter their domain unchallenged. Kamali needed a disguise and a ruse. So, one moonlit evening, she turned to the ebony mirror once again, unraveling a hidden incantation to mask her appearance. As she chanted, she felt her body grow warm, as though flames were licking at her skin from the inside. Slowly, her reflection changed, her regal bearing melted into the stooped stance of an aging peddler woman. Her face withered, wrinkles appearing like cracks in parched earth. Her fine garments shifted to coarse, tattered robes in the mirror's gleaming surface. She let out a raspy breath, disgusted by this unsightly form, yet pleased. If the illusions held, not even the sharp-eyed guardians would recognize her. Next, Kamali reached for a ripe marula fruit she had prepared. Its sweet fragrance could lure anyone on a hot afternoon. Carefully, she dipped the fruit stem into her vile brew, allowing just enough poison to seep into its flesh. The queen smiled grimly. A single bite would bring Zuri to her knees. Days later, as the noonday sun beat down on the forest canopy, Zuri and her guardians went about their daily tasks. Amare, Kioni, and Johi ventured deeper into the bush to track a herd of antelope, hoping to secure meat to smoke and store for the coming weeks. Mama Kolila stayed behind to tend to her herb garden near the hut, while Kwame and Rahima embarked on a trip to collect clay for potmaking. Faraji, enthusiastic and youthful, offered to escort Zuri to gather fresh water from a nearby spring. As they walked among the towering baobabs, the birdsong overhead seemed unusually subdued. Perhaps the forest sensed an intruder. Eventually, Faraji parted ways with Zuri, following the stream to check on the fish traps he had set days before. Zuri filled a pair of water gourds, one balanced on her head, the other tucked under her arm. She hummed a gentle tune Mama Kolila had taught her, grateful for the peaceful routine that had become her refuge.